All right, we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Juan David Rojas, who is the Latin America columnist at Compact Magazine. Juan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
So, for those who are not familiar with your work, tell us your background, but then about some of the topics that you tend to focus on in your pieces.
All right, so I'm Colombian American. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. But my parents moved here when I was really young, like 3 or 4 years old, late 90s. And so I grew up in South Florida, Broward County, not actually Miami-Dade, but yeah, I'm very familiar with like Miami politics and like the cultural scene, etc. It's kind of all intertwined in South Florida, maybe a little bit less so in Palm Beach County,
Mhm.
but yeah, the Tri-County area, that's is typically referred to as all of South Florida. Um, so yeah, I grew up in a suburb called Coral Springs, and what else? So yeah, just growing up down here, uh, I've always had a contrarian bent, and the dominant strand here of politics, yeah, is neoconservatism, given all the Cuban Americans, South Americans, etc. The Colombian American community down here is extremely conservative.
Mhm.
And yeah, I always found a lot of that stuff repellent. I mean, it's not to say I also like despise a lot of the regimes that people down here hate. I just think that the way they go about opposing them and the policies they advocate for are counterproductive and insane and cruel. But yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, it's funny too because where I grew up, Coral Springs, at the same time is a kind of in my imaginary, like all American suburb,
Mhm.
like a very normal, diverse American suburb. A lot of yeah, white Americans from New York. At least when I was growing up, it's changed a little bit since then. From all the people that have come in from other states in recent years. But yeah, also Caribbean immigrants from like the Black Caribbean, and then yeah, Cuban Americans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, etc., South Americans, and yeah, Asians, whatever. But yeah, I had a what I would consider to be a wholesome upbringing. I went on to get a bachelor's and later a master's at the University of Florida uh, in political science and then in Latin American studies. In between there, I then actually went to live in Colombia for around 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, did that was a part of a research study for a professor of mine at UF on community policing. So I actually got to work directly with police officers in the city of Medellin, Colombia, which I actually had not visited at that point yet because I always would visit Bogota, where I was born, where my family's from. Um, and that was a really fascinating experience because I was there in 2018 and 2019, right before all the chaos in 2020, and being over there. And actually working with a lot of like lefty academic types. I remember distinctly one of my peers like said to me, it's like, wow, man, before like doing this job, I had a really negative perception of police. And yeah, like police abuse in a country like Colombia is very serious. But like, the people we were working with, I felt that 90% of like the patrol officers were really kind, decent human beings, extremely hard workers,
Mhm.
really dedicated to their communities. There were bad apples for sure.
Yeah.
And like, people with like direct ties to organized crime and stuff like that. But I really came to respect the profession. And so that also colored a lot of my thinking when 2010-20 came along here in the US and I was here in the US. Um, so yeah. Oh, the last thing I'll say on my background, which is kind of interesting, is that I'm actually one-fourth Mexican American.
Hmm.
And it's actually because of my grandfather. He's the reason all my family is here in the US. My grandfather, he was born just south of the border, I think in Laredo or Nuevo Laredo, whichever side that is, I don't remember. But he was raised in the US. I think he even told me he like part of his upbringing was in like Nebraska. I don't remember,
Hmm.
but a lot of it in Texas. And he went on to go into the military because actually a lot of his family served in the military. He's really my grandpa's side of the family is really fascinating because they've spent like hundreds of years on both sides of the border. His
Hmm.
dad grew up in Mexico. He grew up in the U.S. and his grandfather grew up in the U.S. and fought in World War One.
Wow.
And so my grandpa and his brother um, served in Korea.
Hmm. Okay.
And then after yeah he was in Korea, he became a merchant marine and like was traveling all over the world by boat, which is hilarious because he couldn't swim. But he met my grandmother in Cartagena, Colombia, and the rest is kind of history. And then that's how then like my mom, she was born a U.S. citizen, and then when my dad married her, they eventually moved to the U.S. in the '90s, and yeah, I was also eligible for U.S. citizenship. And nowadays, yeah, all my living grandparents are living here in South Florida, actually.
Hmm. So, I mean, I should mention, I mean, cracks in postmodernity primarily focuses on culture. And when we do talk about politics, it's for the kind of cultural hot takes. So I know why I'm not, like, my priority is not politics, but my main interest is not. I'm curious for you though, like, what was it that kind of like really captivated you? Like, what is it that made you concerned, interested about politics so much?
I don't know. I always I love history as a child. I just like pick up books, history books of like all different kinds of history and would read and just, the analogy with like current politics. Like it just always interested me, found it fascinating. And I missed this question that you asked. In my columns, yeah, I don't focus on culture. I focus mainly, yeah, on like elections, political economy, uh, significant developments in different X or Y Latin American countries, and yeah, I've also written about like Miami.
Yeah. So again, as being someone who's like in the world of politics, like yeah, like who associates with people in the world of politics, I should say, but like not totally of it. No, I've always appreciated like the way that you're able to capture what's going on in Latin American politics, like with this real attention to nuances that tend to get very much
Lost.
overlooked,
Yeah,
especially in the US,
totally.
because first of all, because we're dumb in the US, like we don't understand nuance, but also because what's going on in Latin American countries, like it's a different game. Like the categories, the parties, the options are very different. So I think it's like if people want to know more about Latin American politics, they definitely should check out your work because I think you kind of take, yeah, like I think you help Americans to kind of like start to grasp what's going on there. What does it have to do with what's going on in the U.S.?
Yeah, and they increasingly mirror each other. I mean, I've said this
Yeah,
for a long time that the U.S. or vice versa is becoming a Latin American country
yeah, yeah. Why
with
though?
all the
Why?
good and bad that comes with that.
Say more about that though, because that's a very provocative hot take.
Uh-huh. Oh, you're asking me
Yeah, yeah.
why
What,
I
what
think
do you
that?
mean by that? Why are you saying that?
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, in the past 4 decades, inequality has really soared in the U.S. and the defining feature of Latin America, a lot of people would argue, is inequality by any metric. It's the most unequal region in the world. It's also the most violent in the world. And it's funny because, in like the U.S., like in like rural areas, suburbs, there's crime, but it's not really like high impact crime.
Hmm.
But in a lot of American cities, and especially in recent years, crime is a very serious problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, even before 2020 or like BLM 2014, etc. Uh, like I follow this stuff all the time. I actually worked in security, like in intelligence in Latin America, but relating to Latin America.
Hmm.
And like there's always a list that comes out every year, like the 50 most violent cities in the world. And every time, at least like 10 of them are in the US.
Really?
There's a there's
Wow.
a lot of the problem children, New Orleans, Baltimore, uh, actually not so much Chicago. It's more parts of Chicago, but St. Louis. St. Louis is also extremely dangerous.
Hmm.
You look at the homicide rates in a lot of these cities, it's like the same as made, a lot of these extremely violent cities in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of increasing similarities. I think the root of it is yeah, kind of the same, that inequality. And yeah, we'll talk about this in a bit, but yeah, I've also said that Donald Trump, who may well become president again and be reelected in a few days, he's kind of a Latin American president in his style, rhetoric, and persona,
Yeah,
if
why?
not ancestry.
What do you, I mean, again, I make this joke a lot about the worldwide Latino belt. I don't think his heritage counts as being part of it, but
Totally, totally
I
not.
do think spiritually he's probably
Hmm.
born. No, because I definitely think I think I posted a few weeks ago. I found that I was baptized on the Feast of Guadalupe. So like I do think
Ooh.
it's a thing that spiritually you can be part of the world. So why is Trump a Latin American? Like, what do you see in him?
He's a populist. I mean, and the defining feature of Latin American politics is this perennial, sometimes debilitating tendency towards populism. And it makes sense. You have, so, this much inequality in these countries. There's going to be a gravitation towards these charismatic individuals that promise easy solutions, but on the other hand, are actually willing to make critiques that establishment types simply won't make. And so I drew this parallel in my column from this week. It's something I've said repeatedly. There's a lot of qualities that Trump has that are actually more similar to many Latin American leftists than conservatives. In a way, he's kind of the perfect uh, populist for Latinos here in the U.S., but also in Latin America, which is why in a number of countries, yeah, positive feelings towards Trump in Latin America have increased. He You look at conservatives
Mm,
in Latin America, like conservative leaders, the overwhelming characteristic that they all share is that they're either current or former businessmen, like Trump. On the other hand, and they tend to be these really stick in the mud establishment types that just fetishize norms and all of the like. It's the leftists most of the time, with some exceptions, that are these bombastic, like Chavez types, Tribune of the People, you know, or Lula railing against interest rates.
mhm.
I mean, who's basically the only like person here that in the U.S. that rails against high interest rates, which affect people's ability to buy homes. Trump, so he's also a protectionist. Conservatives in Latin America, not anymore, are not protectionists. They're overwhelmingly pro free trade. It's the leftists that tend to be consistently, especially the nationalist types, are protectionists.
Yeah. So I mean, let me just say that like going back to my comment about Americans being dumb, like most Americans, at least ones I associate with, will not be able to process what you're saying because
Hmm.
Trump is mean and conservatives are mean. So how is
Hey, but that's the thing. A lot of the leftists in Latin America, they're not nice. They're mean. The
but that's the
nationalist type,
thing.
at least.
Like we
AMLO in Mexico, Chavez, Maduro, they are mean. They are rude. They can be nasty, aggressive. Like there's a lot of parallels.
but that's the thing that's strange. Like obviously the kind of like the niceness and tolerance of the American left is it's a kind of deceptive thing. I think most people can recognize this. But I think
Totally.
what's more concerning is like that it masks itself as progressive.
Hmm.
I mean the establishment left, the liberal left, like is I mean not progressive in the true sense of the word, even though they're the nice people who talk about caring for the oppressed. Um, and again, you can debate whether his policies actually benefit
Hmm.
people who, are not well to do.
Very good point.
But the style, you
Exactly.
like that's the kind
Exactly.
of dissonance. That style obviously is appealing to people who are not very polished and and to me, when I hear about AMLO or whoever other leftist politician in Latin America who has that populist, that brash, politically incorrect style, like I see why people would gravitate towards that and why like it's the conservatives who are very stuffy.
Hmm.
But no, it's just to say that I think Americans, we get very stuck in our own paradigm and want to
Totally.
project it onto every other country when no, like the world, I shouldn't have to say, but the world is not a monolith. Like every country has their own kind of paradigm. You can't fit everything into America's left-right establishment, left-right one, you know.
Which it's funny that you say that. I actually think that the origin of a lot of that is not so much from like Native and especially like white Americans. It's because of like my neighbors around here that
Mhm.
have actually corrupted the perception of a lot of these things. They like graft on what they think should be interpreted from like, politics in X or Y country, but it's consistently a lot of the times like people who read my columns, it's like white Americans will tell me, "Wow, that's super interesting." Whereas a lot of like the Latinos, they'll be like, "No, you
Hmm.
don't understand. He's a communist." And
Okay. Those are Cubans, though.
uh-huh,
Yeah, and like I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of Cubans like this, and I get
uh-huh.
it. I get if that's what you're coming from. You want
Yeah, I
a
get it too.
knee-jerk reaction, but like anyhow, conservatism. I don't know, and I also, I mean, on a kind of woke note, like I do think there's a racial politics going on in that kind of reaction because, like, I know a lot of Cubans who are very bent on, like, oh, my grandmother was from Spain, you know, I'm
Yeah,
white,
yeah, yep.
and it's like, so I don't know. There's another level there, but again, in terms of Trump being a Latin American politician, yes, like I was telling you before, I know plenty of Latinos who are big
Mhm.
fans of Trump, including people with family members who are not documented.
Yep.
And if you like most of my, well-to-do college-educated friends would be like, "Oh my God, they've been duped. He's telling them this message, and then they're all
Uh-huh.
gonna get deported." And I'm like, sure, there's cognitive dissonance there, but again, on a cultural, on a spiritual level, I totally get why people gravitate towards him versus towards, again, these kind of very stuffy establishment liberals. Um, so again, like these categories, these narratives that we rely on are, I don't know, just
And,
kind
and
of,
you know, yeah, that's the thing though. This like contingent of like the despicable elitist upper class that looks down on, the masses for being crass or whatever, or having X or Y politics. Like, yeah, it's the same people. It sometimes manifests in in like a different left or right, but uh politics. But it's the same class of people with the same class of backgrounds.
mhm,
So yeah, in like Mexico, the Mexican opposition, it's overwhelmingly upper class, educated, fascinating. The progressive climate scientist, new president of Mexico. The only demographic of voters that she did not win in the election a few months ago were PhDs.
hmm,
She herself has a PhD. She's Dr. Shanebaum. But that
huh,
was the only category, the only demographic that the opposition won. It's incredible.
interesting. Yeah. Actually, I do want to touch on some of these Latin American celebrity endorsements.
Totally.
Um, yeah, because like as a big reggaeton fan, I think it's been
You
fun.
like reggaeton. Oh,
Oh
look at
my
that.
God, no, I'm a big proponent of reggaeton. Yeah, so yeah, everybody was going wild because okay, it was within like the span of 2 weeks. It was Nicky Jam, Justin Quiles, and Anuel who spoke at Trump rallies. And there's the one with Nicky
And now some
Jam.
of them have U-turned
Yeah.
because of Tony whatever his comments.
Yeah, so it was Nikki. Well, when Trump introduced them, Trump had no idea who they were. So he was like, "Yeah, Nikki Jam, she's amazing, right? Everybody agrees. Yeah, she's great." Had no idea. And then, so yeah, they endorsed him, and their little speech was like bullshit. They didn't say anything. And then yeah, and then after the rally last weekend, Nikki Jam rescinded. He's like, "Actually, no, Trump hates Puerto Rico." And then Bad Bunny, who's for a while he's been like saying stuff about Puerto Rican politics against the establishment. I mean, I've had so we had on our Substack, we had Carlos Engaña who wrote a piece about these like Trump endorsements, and I was talking to him yesterday about Bad Bunny, and he was saying, like he thinks there's something hopeful about the biggest. I mean, he was the biggest musician in the world. He was Spotify #1 for 3 years, bringing attention to Puerto Rican politics. And I was like, you know what? I hope. I mean, that would be nice, but at the same time, I think there's something deeply performative and
Totally.
like empty about it. So I don't know. I mean, I know I'm nihilistic, but in that way, but but then no, with him and this like my whole thing with the rally, it's like, sure, objectively, shouldn't it's kind of horrible to call people's homeland garbage. I just don't take anything that happens at a Trump rally seriously because I know it's all
Yeah,
performance art. I know
yeah,
it's all spectacle. And it's part of it is to provoke the left to go
yeah,
into
yeah,
this
absolutely.
outrage.
Hmm.
And it's just this back and forth. And my whole thing is like now that we have this kind of this performative, the right says something atrocious and the left has to take a moral stand against it. What's actually happening on the ground? Like what is happening in an island like Puerto Rico, where they have their own politics that people within the mainland US like don't really understand, and like there's a lot at stake. So I don't know. I'm very skeptical about this celebrity stuff. And again, the reactionary, like, oh, we must, like, all the people who made a statement about the comedian dude, like, okay, and now what changes in Puerto Rico? Nothing.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. What are your hot takes on this whole Puerto Rico, the situation, the joke, and whatnot?
I mean, yeah, I don't think it's smart politically. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't like it personally. Am I horribly offended by it? I mean, this is a guy who does like roasts, so uh, take with that what you will. That's kind of to be expected that he was gonna, and he also, what was it? He said like something offensive about I forget what other group, but although there was also some pretty wild things, yeah, at that rally, like whatever the Satanism thing, uh, but
I don't, but that's the thing, I don't take it seriously.
yeah, yeah,
I
no,
don't take,
neither do I, and I don't really know if it'll make a difference. I mean, I saw some polls going around that now like 80% of the Puerto Rican community in Orlando here in Florida, that's where the majority of like Puerto Ricans in the state are in Orlando are gonna like vote for Kamala Harris. I don't think it'll make a difference in the state, but I mean, yeah, like he's a comic, so he's not actually emblematic of. But I mean, yeah, it is offensive. It's not smart. They shouldn't
no,
have
I
done
mean,
that.
nobody should say, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if I took this seriously, like if I thought this were all like not performance art, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, that's atrocious. Like, why would you ever say
Mm,
that? But again, the whole back and forth, I'm just like,
yeah,
are you seriously doing this right now? Like, nah.
it's annoying.
But again, my moral concern is okay, so what's actually happening in Puerto Rico now? Like, do people
Yeah, yeah, and
rather than making your statement, like, do you take an interest in what are the needs in Puerto Rico and what are because again in Compact, we were saying Jose who wrote
yeah,
the
Soto. I was about to bring that up.
yeah, I mean like that, but that's the kind of thing that I think like rather than making your statement against this comedian, like how about let's inform ourselves what's going on rather than retweeting Bad Bunny's video. Like I don't know. I'm just very, very jaded with like the performativity of everything going on right now, but that's what the people want, and so that's what they get. I don't know.
I too am nihilistic, pretty nihilistic about U.S. politics, but
Yeah. Um, well, I did want to mention though, I think I sent you that article about that tiny faction of Puerto Ricans that want to return to being part of Spain. That's like
uh-huh.
that's something that needs to enter into the discourse.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think
I mean,
Spain even wants Puerto Rico back, but
Jose's article that was recently published in Compact is interesting because it actually describes what I was saying a moment ago, how Puerto Rico, in this case, is becoming more like the US. Because historically, Puerto Rican politics revolved not around like ideology, like left or right, or it's just like, more government or less government, etc. Conservatism or social progressivism. It was what relationship do we want to have with the United States? Do we want to continue being a quasi colony, whatever territory, whatever you want to call it? Do we want to become a state? Do we want to become independent? And for a long time, and this is, in my opinion, a big source of the problems in Puerto Rico. Like Puerto Ricans themselves, just there was no agreement exactly on what they wanted. That's changed a bit. Yeah, I think now the polls say that increasing numbers are in favor of statehood. Uh, and in turn, the politics is shifting to one where now the parties are more ideological.
and that I mean, but that is my concern though with Puerto Rican celebrities, whether endorsing or condemning Trump. I'm just like, is this a real benefit to the island to collapse everything within the US paradigm? Like,
Hmm.
I think I'm very pro like Puerto Rico maintaining its own paradigm. That's
Well,
uh
but in a sense, they almost don't. I mean, the really the most important thing is that they solve that question. What relationship do they want to have with the U.S.? And that's complicated by the fact that once they do come to like an overwhelming consensus of what they want to do, will
mm,
they be able to do it based on the politics here in the U.S.? Like if they want to become a state, they'd have to get admitted, and then that would have to go through Congress, and I think get
yeah.
accepted by X amount of states. It's uh, it's depressing.
Yeah. So, all right, so let's move on. I wanted to talk about the cultural politics surrounding
Mhm.
evangelicalism in Latin America. I mean, I think it was like 2 years ago, the Washington Post had this really long piece about the evangelicals taking over. And I know like a lot of Catholics like were posting it around, being like, "Oh no, the Catholic Church has failed," which is largely true, I think, in Latin America.
Depends on the country, but it is something that, yeah,
Yes.
I'm also Catholic. I do find troubling the incredible spread of evangelical Christianity in a lot of countries.
Yeah. I mean, I completely get it. Um, yeah, when I was in Brazil 13 years ago,
Uh,
I'm old. So I was on like a kind of service trip and we stayed at a Catholic parish, which was very active, but then we visited an evangelical one and it was like really intense and
oh yeah.
lively, as Brazilian evangelicals are. Um, but yeah, so before we get into like the kind of political implications, I don't know, I don't know, like why do you think it's spreading so quickly? Like what's your take on its popularity now in Latin America?
In Brazil, I think a lot of it does have to, I mean, it is a historical trend. It's something that's been happening, I think, since the 90s, and it's really astounding. Like, I think if you look at it in like 1990, 80 odd percent of the country was Catholic. And now it's something like 50 odd percent is Catholic, with like 38, close to 40% evangelicals. And actually, this often gets ignored. Brazil is a focus of this, but the real epicenter of evangelical Christianity in Latin America is Central American countries. Uh,
Really?
yeah,
No. That's kind of a
Guatemala,
shame to me.
Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica. Um, Not so much Panama, it seems, but those
Wow.
four, especially,
I had
are
no idea.
extremely evangelical. I think in one of them, evangelicals are close to a majority. It's kind of like 50-50,
What?
40 odd
I had
percent
no
Catholic,
idea.
40 odd percent evangelical.
Wow. I had
And
no idea.
the way I interpret a lot of this is that it has to do with a lot of the crises that these countries have faced. In Brazil's case, um, it really took off after 2014. All of these crises with corruption and the recession post the commodities bust, and Lula being imprisoned, Dilma being impeached, Bolsonaro taking over, the Lava Jato investigations, which imprisoned like so much of the political class. But the economic devastation, it really seems to have pushed a lot of people into embracing evangelical Christianity, which has this more kind of messianic message, and also a message of like aspiration, entrepreneurialism, and getting ahead. My friend Bruna Frascola is a really interesting Brazilian writer, published for Compact. I helped her. Brazil just had local elections for mayor all over the country this past Sunday, and Sao Paulo had this horrible candidate for mayor who didn't make it to the runoff, Pablo Marçal, who was this evangelical guru coach who was just a polemicist and like an actually like convicted criminal, and almost made it to the runoff by like points of a percentage. It didn't make it. And he has all this message that you need to get yourself ahead. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. God wants you to succeed and make
Um,
money. And that's the way I see it in Brazil. In Central America, a lot of it is historical, missionary work from evangelical Christians here in the US. But similarly, since the 80s, these countries have been devastated by civil wars and stagnation, crime, the gangs and all of it. It's something that's pushed a lot of people to embrace evangelical Christianity, including like the gangs themselves. A lot of these gangs at MS-13 and Barrio 18 have really interesting prison politics that is cohabitates with like Pentecostalism and whatever. It's like a way, it's like the only legitimate way for you to leave the gang is to embrace God, and then they'll leave you alone.
Interesting. Okay. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm like again, like cultural, spiritual level, I totally see why evangelicalism's more appealing than the brand of Catholicism that was brought over to Latin America because the Spaniards, you know how they are and
Yeah,
their brand of Catholicism, and like you can see why the more fiery,
yeah,
passionate
yeah.
brand of Christianity appeals. But I do think like structurally, sociologically, it's like the hierarchy and like the order of the Catholic Church. Like, yeah, it's harder to it's difficult. It's very difficult to work with, but
Mhm.
it does provide certain stability, certain protections from abuses of power. Again,
Yeah,
obviously the Catholic Church has plenty of abuse,
yeah,
but the hierarchy protects from it becoming, like a complete mess. Whereas I mean, not to knock the Protestants, but objectively, the fact that there isn't like a clear authority, clear order, like it allows for these mega church pastors to like, to do whatever they want and to preach whatever they want. And they can be very charismatic and appealing, but then,
a lot of them are criminals too.
yeah, but it also criminals, but also like within the Catholic Church, like priests are not allowed to preach on certain political
Yeah,
topics. So like, yeah. Anyway, so I mean, you see how these differences play out. Um, but okay, but let's talk. I want to talk a little bit more about Brazil and I mean, we were talking before some of the cultural politics surrounding Bolsonaro and how I was saying like here, I mean in New Jersey, there's a big Brazilian community and they still have their little banners out for him and their truck going around playing his theme song. Very, very Bolsonaristas. But yeah, what's his deal? Like for Americans who don't know him, like how would you describe his the whole phenomenon surrounding him?
yeah. So the funny thing is that he's often kind of misidentified as evangelical, but he is in fact Catholic. He's not really practicing. But his rhetoric, his ethos is all, God, Brazil, country, family, etc. And he's very popular among evangelical Christians in Brazil. I think a lot of his support, yeah, goes hand in hand with how much the movement has grown in the country because it's just, you see the same thing in Central America, actually. In Central America, especially in the Northern Triangle countries, leftists are, especially like social progressivism, it doesn't work.
Hmm.
Like they only get elected kind of by chance or by lack of a better alternative as in Guatemala now with Arevalo, but it's just toxic. The, the broader public doesn't want to hear it. Gay
Yeah.
rights, abortion rights, all that stuff. It's completely repellent. And security too. There's a propensity towards iron fist policies and thinking that we need a strong man to clamp down on crime. Um, so you look at these elections in Central America, and a lot of the times it's between two conservatives.
Hmm.
And if there's a left, it's a kind of like conservative leftist that's very like religious
Yeah.
and like socially conservative. In Brazil, it's as Bruna points out, and I've said this. Lula is kind of exceptional. He's a really good politician, and part of it's probably also the fact that he's older, so he kind of comes from like that older tradition. But a lot of the people in the government, in his government, and in like the Brazilian leftist coalition that he's fighting with all the time are these maniac like environmentalists, social progressives that just are hell bent on like destroying the country or getting themselves thrown out of power. It doesn't work, guys. The public just doesn't want to hear it. They're pushing things, yeah, like Bruna brought up. I saw this and was horrified. The uh, the candidate in the runoff in Sao Paulo, Guilherme Boulos, who a lot of his economic policies I agree with and I think are worth celebrating, just got killed because like he did things like there was this event where Lula was also president, where the like a singer sang the national anthem in gender neutral language. Dude, like
Yeah, they don't.
this is insanity. I find it disgusting. But you think like evangelical Christians in Brazil, how are they going to feel about this? They're going to hate it. And so all this other kind of stuff. There's a lot of like this horrible degrowth left that wants to just keep the Amazon this pristine like national park and like, with like everyone there living in squalor. The like racial crap, quotas and identity politics. It's also insufferable. Oh, and as a result, leftist parties got killed in these mayoral elections. Really, I kind of think Lula is almost the only leftist that could get elected in Brazil at this point, and he just barely scraped by against Bolsonaro.
Yeah. Mm. So let's move from Brazil to Miami. There's a lot
Oh,
going
wait,
on.
wait, 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 hold on.
Yeah.
I do want to say one more thing about
Yeah.
Brazil that I think is really interesting that I like to point out all the time. Brazil's fascinating because it's almost two countries, the like north and northeast, and the south and southeast. Brazil's typically described as those four regions. So the north is like the Amazon, the
Mhm.
northeast is like the tip of the country, that block, and then the southeast is where Sao Paulo and Rio are, and then the south is bordering Argentina, Uruguay, etc.
Mhm.
And um, you look at this both religious or in terms of religiosity and also politically. The North and Northeast are like completely separate from and have like almost opposite um, demographic patterns than the South and Southeast. What do I mean by that? So Lula had like these huge margins. The PT had these huge margins in 2022 in the countryside in the North and Northeast. Bolsonaro was strong in the cities in the North and Northeast.
Mhm.
But in the South, it was the opposite. In the South and Southeast, Lula was strong in the cities, kind of like Democrats here, and Bolsonaro in the countryside. And that's also reflected by this dynamic between Catholic and evangelicals. In the
Mm.
North and Northeast, Catholics are overwhelming in the countryside and evangelicals in the city. And the South's a bit different, because there's more evangelicals overall in the South and the Southeast.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating thing that I've observed, and I wish was talked more about.
It's worth writing about for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, because again, like I think at least in the US, these are the kinds of things we overlook
Hmm.
because we're very quick to try to fit it within our kind of boxes. But yeah, no, I mean, I think Brazil is fascinating for, yeah, on numerous levels, political, cultural, all of the above. You've spent time in Brazil at all?
I've only been to the Amazon, specifically the tri border with it's Colombia, Brazil, Peru.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah, I was in Tocantins back in
Oh
2011.
wow, that's a place in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah, it was an experience for
Wow.
sure. I built a house,
Built a house,
and
cool.
actually, no, we helped some people build a house. It was part of like a service project at my Jesuit university, which, I mean, in theory, it was like missionary, but nobody was religious in the group. The leader was a lapsed Catholic communist white girl.
Wow.
Very nice person, very nice person. But yeah, but no, we stayed with the Catholic parish there, and it was such a sense of community that you don't see at many Catholic churches in the US.
Well,
No, like just
God
like
bless you, Stephen, keeping Catholicism alive in Brazil.
yeah, no, it was fun because like the neighborhood kids were like always coming into the parish and we're always involved in stuff and people were always cooking and feeding us. And then they had like their Marian processions. But yeah, and then we went to the evangelical church and it was yeah, super intense. I was like alert and terrified at the same time because it like they put on this like this morality play about the end times and how the people who drink and fornicate are all going to be left behind.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I don't know, it was interesting because when they were preparing us for this trip, they talked a lot about sex work. I'm not going to use the other word, but no, so like we saw prostitutes walking around
Yeah.
and they were like, you know, this is a real thing. And the whole like the religious politics surrounding it was interesting because like the evangelicals were very much like, this is a sin and you will go to hell. And I was like, the very like lefties in our group were like, oh my God, so judgmental. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't think that's really gonna help a prostitute to like leave that behind
Hmm.
because there are like bigger, like sure, there's the moral question. There's always a moral question, but you know, there are bigger socioeconomic questions at stake.
Hmm.
And the Catholic priest was much more based in like the he was like, of course
We
it's a
welcome all of our
sin.
children, yeah, like
But like, but in the sense he's like, look, like Jesus says it's a sin not because it's naughty, but because like it's not like good for your dignity. But I'm not gonna like preach from the pulpit, all you prostitutes are going to hell. Like if there's a woman who comes to me who's in sex work, I'm gonna try to help her find a job the best I can.
everyone is capable of redemption, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean the Catholics had, I mean, the more nuanced approach, but like I understood why the evangelicals were so fire and brimstone because I think they know how damaging that kind of life is. They want to
Hmm.
scare you out of it with like the whole morality and the hell. But I fear only works for so long. Anyway, so that was, I don't know. So that was like a big thing. They would talk about prostitution, talked about, you know, food scarcity, yeah, the racism, colorism, blah, blah, blah. But Brazil was, yeah, it was a good experience. Love hanging around Brazilians now. Love the food, love the music, all of it. Um, so yeah, okay. So can we go to Miami?
Totally.
So yeah, tell us something. What should we start with? Tell us how is life in Miami? That's what I want to know first.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, again, disclosure. I don't actually, I was living in Doral in
Okay,
Miami-Dade up until a year ago. Then we moved to Broward. We're living in a plantation, which is just outside of Fort Lauderdale.
okay.
I was in Miami yesterday. It was actually for a screening of a documentary
Hmm.
by a filmmaker we like a lot, about the so-called Bay of Piglets invasion.
Oh,
That was this insane plot of Jordan Goudreau, the Canadian American mercenary, tried to go to Venezuela to topple Maduro in 2020. It was a complete disaster.
okay.
Uh, and the U.S. government denied involvement, but actually like this guy like had like close connections with like a I forget their names, but anyway, like Trump's like one of Trump's closest bodyguards and someone close to Mike Pence, and like they approached him and said, "Hey, we're interested
Oh wow.
in doing this." But anyway, so yeah, I love living down here actually. It's it's yeah, there's always a lot of culture that's to be proud of, the music, um, events in the city and stuff like that, Fort Lauderdale as well. And yeah, and there's homelessness and crime and problems like in any other cities, especially in certain areas. But yeah, honestly, I'd have to say that a lot of cities here in Florida and especially Miami are probably better run than many of their progressive counterparts elsewhere. It's
Hmm.
yeah, it's a good place to live. Having been raised in a suburb, I prefer living in a suburb. A lot of the problems of the inner city are far less prevalent here, so can just visit whenever. But it's a great place. I like
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, we were talking about the Cuban neocons before.
it.
Yeah, where is that headed right now? Like, did you see that? Is that trend continuing? Is it shifting in some way? What's going on?
It's going to continue, probably get worse, and they will their reign over the state will never end. It's I've actually argued that but because people talk about how Florida's become a red state and whatever, and they say, oh, it's the people moving here because of the low taxes and whatever. But it's true in a lot of places, including a lot of
Mm.
states that have become more blue, like than they were before, like Georgia or Arizona. I think that a big part of it is actually immigration. In the past 10 and especially 5 years, the amount of immigration to Florida has been very significant, and it's been overwhelmingly from um, immigrants from countries destroyed by leftist governments, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, especially Cuba and Venezuela. Like the numbers are completely astounding. In Cuba, it's something like the past 4 years, 1 million, 2 million people have left the island. And guess where they've come? They're right here. And they've had there's really no such thing as illegal immigration for Cubans, because any Cuban, if you just come here illegally and you manage to stay here a year, you're automatically eligible for residency
Right. I didn't know that.
per the Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966.
Huh.
And
That,
so this is something that's just fed. It's a symbiosis between the regime over on the island, which I despise, by the way, and I've been to Cuba. I think it's terrible.
yeah.
Um, but the neocons here, they need one another in order to survive. I mean, they just replenish their ranks through this open border policy from all the people that just flee Cuba all the time over the course of decades, but especially now.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that was still in effect. What that explains a lot. Um, yeah, because I mean, I see it even up here. Like, yeah, pretty much all the Cubans I know are die hard neocons, and like, I get it,
It's
but
understandable. Yeah, I actually don't blame them. I disagree, but
yeah,
I understand why
yeah,
it
I'm
is
not mad at
why
them.
they are the way they are.
I mean, I would hope at some point, like, again, I'm an outsider, so it's hard for me to say, but I just think at a certain point, you start to be like, okay, we had our moment of reacting, like the knee-jerk reaction to communism, go to the neocons and the Reaganites. And then you ask, so where is this headed? Like, is this like really a substantial like solution? Uh, I mean, personally, I don't think so, but I kind of think there needs to be a time for like the Cubans to kind of reevaluate their collective stance because I don't know. I just don't. I think it's time. I think at a certain point you just have to like ask, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's funny because not so long ago, during like the Obama opening and all that, there was like one my fiance works at a Florida International University in Miami, and they have what's called a Cuba poll, where they like poll Cuban Americans on like attitudes towards Cuba and like politics and lots of different stuff. The one that just came out like a few weeks ago found record support for Trump among Cuban Americans. But interestingly, there was like one year, I think it was like 2015, 2014, where a slim majority of Cubans answered that they were in favor of removing the embargo.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, a lot of people credit that to the Obama opening, which finally, like, there was more travel and tourism to Cuba, although on like a limited basis. But since then, and I really just blame this on how much worse things have gotten on the island. Public opinion has shifted way back in favor of the embargo, and it doesn't make sense because uh, the philosophy of it's really funny, but the philosophy of a lot of Cuban Americans and neocons of whatever ancestry is just, oh, we need to make things worse on the island so people will rise up and overthrow the government. If we just get them to starve,
Hmm.
they will rise up and overthrow the regime. Now,
Huh.
I mean, it's a
Hmm.
little silly because like people are actually starving on the island right now, and so then the neocons will just say, "Oh no, no, it has nothing to do with what we're doing." Uh, putting them on as a listing them as a state sponsor of terrorism and the embargo, that has nothing to do with it. It's just communism. Communism doesn't work, which is true. That is also a factor. Communism is stupid and horrible, but their philosophy that is their philosophy. They want to make things on the island as bad as possible so people will rise up and overthrow the government. The problem is that There's no way that that can happen. There are no guns. Apparently, there's a bit more now, but there's very few guns on the island. The regime is a extremely capable police state that's spying on people all the time through a network of informants in like every neighborhood. It's not going to happen. So the neocons, are just hell bent on actually making people suffer, and they just there's no end to it. They can't see another way. Really, I just see it as, again, that symbiosis. In reality, there's so many people that profit off of this status quo. If it changed, they'd be screwed.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, this that wouldn't be the first time anyone tried that tactic of just trying to make everything fall apart. So then, you know, yeah, we've seen it before. But yeah, but I was saying to you before how like it's interesting that from a lot of the Cubans I know, like there is this weird like class racial dynamic happening, or that's kind of tied to their esteem for the neocons. Because like yeah, like I know a lot of Cubans who play up the whole you know
Freedom,
yeah, freedom,
democracy,
democracy, um, you know, yeah.
Western values. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm. So, you know what I was going to ask you though about Miami? Did you see the tablet article about the Miami Latinos converting to Islam?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was.
What the hell?
Yeah, I have to send this to you. No,
Huh?
this person did a profile on a bunch of Latinos converting because they are very. No, so this was the hot take that the women are tired of machismo and they think that Islam teaches men to respect women and not be overly sexualized. And the fact that,
Wow.
women wear the hijab, it's like I'm not an object. And some of them are saying like Christianity was not rigorous enough morally, or like was not strong enough to condemn machismo. There's like different spins on it, but yeah, like apparently there are these mosques in Miami full of Latinos, and like at their Ramadan, when they have iftar, they're like eating empanadas and ropa vieja, and it's like, I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know how long that will last, but I don't know. I see why someone who's
Yeah, yeah. As
fed
insane as
up
it
with
seems, I guess there's a
machismo.
certain logic to it.
There is.
Uh, I mean,
Um,
here's a funny thing, and this I'm sure people will call me prejudiced for saying this, but I always find fascinating the the way that a lot of people from, but it's really mostly the Cubans, honestly. The Venezuelans and Nicaraguans are chill, mostly because anyway, but their countries really have no hope, and they don't have like these historical communities
mhm,
here to the same extent as Cubans. But there's a fascinating dynamic that happens. You see, like when a lot of Cubans come here, the second they step foot in the United States, they just change completely.
mhm,
uh the like penchant towards excess, the gold chains and all this kind of stuff, like it's because on the island they have nothing.
yeah.
And you see some of this on the island too, like trying to wear brand clothes and whatever, and it's an aspirational thing. The most horrible thing for me about the the way life is on Cuba is that you can't aspire to anything unless like you have family members in the government.
Yeah.
There is no social mobility. It's a hopeless place. You cannot aspire to do anything on the island, pretty much. And so people will come here and they'll think, oh my God, I need to make money. I need to acquire all these possessions, get my Ferrari and my gold chains and whatever. And it makes eminent sense. And similarly, with the politically, it makes a lot of sense too. Like when they're on the island, you'll go to talk to people and everyone wants to leave over there. I was there a few months ago in the summer. I actually would really like to write a piece about this for Compact. I just had other things come in the way. But like for instance, people over there were like saying, "Oh, we need Trump to lose, otherwise we're screwed." And actually, I was there right after the assassination attempt, and people were saying, "Oh, this was," they were saying it was a conspiracy to help Trump, that he staged it. They were saying, "Oh no, that blood, there was like fake blood and and whatnot." But Like a lot of the same people, yeah. The second they leave Cuba, then they'll become like these diehard neocons. While they're on the island, it's so the embargo's terrible. It's making our life miserable and whatever. And as soon as they leave, no, 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 we need the embargo because now that I'm out of there, the people left, they need to rise up and tear down the system.
Yeah. No, I see it. Uh, uh, all right. Well, okay. So I think before we wrap things up, I am going to put you on the spot and ask you for some pop culture hot takes since this is
Sure.
back to postmodernity. Let's start with I mean literature. I don't know if it's pop culture, but like yeah, I don't know, what do you read when you're not reading about politics?
Hmm.
If you do.
The person with regards to like Latin America to ask about this is Jeff. Jeff is like
Yeah,
a huge literature buff, especially relating to Latin America. Wow, I think I told him this once jokingly. Jeff, your quote, Jeff, your erudition never ceases to amaze me.
I would concur. Yeah.
But no, I mean, yeah, I would recommend with regards to Latin America, I would recommend the classics like Garcia Marquez. Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude. I particularly like, because I'm a big fan of Bolivar. As you know, I like history a lot.
Mhm.
The General in his Labyrinth, El General y su Laberinto, which is
Mm,
about like the September conspiracy and whatever against Bolivar before he like stepped down and whatever. Um,
mm. Did you
yeah.
see the mini series about
Oh
Bolivar?
yeah, yeah, yeah. The Netflix is supposed to have a miniseries come out. Who knows if if it'll be good? That's it's
Well,
one of
no,
those
but
books
there
that's
it
been said
was
that can't be adapted.
no, but there was the one back in like 2019 that came out on Netflix.
Was it?
Yeah, I
I
watched
didn't
like
see
two
it.
episodes. It was kind of poorly produced, but yeah. Uh, okay. Well, okay, speaking of that then, film, TV, what are your go-tos?
Film and TV. There's let me see. There's a lot that comes out like all the time of all different kinds of stripes. That's really, really interesting. One of the there's a show that my fiance and I love. It's called Club de Cuervos
Hmm.
on Netflix. It's about this fictional soccer team in Mexico, in a fictitious state, in a fictitious town in Mexico. That the main characters are the owners of the team, and it's kind of like this comedy. It's incredible. I mean, it's just this perfect snapshot of something that's just so core to the Mexican identity, and like it ends up touching everything. Yeah, like politics and uh the country's actuality and all of it. One of the players goes on to run for governor, which is hilarious because then I kid you not, in an election not so long after, there was a former soccer player with the same name as the character in the show, same first name at least, who ran for governor and became governor of the state of
Hmm.
Morelos, I believe, Cuauhtemoc Blanco, completely scandal plagued. Actually, he ran um, with an evangelical party, the
Oh,
PES, and then later switched to Morena, the governing party. But
interesting.
it's an amazing show. It's hilarious. There's a lot of big name Mexican actors in there. Really highly recommend.
Okay. Oh, no, I've never seen it. Um, and music, what would you say?
Music, as a good Colombian, I'm a big salsa fan.
You are.
Yeah, I love Willie
Like
Colon,
you do.
Rubén Blades, the Colombians, Joy Arroyo. There's a lot of like modern artists too. There's and then they actually do a lot of different genres, but there's this lesser known Colombian group from the Pacific, which is a predominantly Afro-Colombian region, called Grupo Bahia,
Hmm.
and they're really really good. It's a amazing. That's another thing I should say about me. I was actually raised as a musician. I played
Oh,
violin and double bass and
wow.
electric bass as well.
Interesting. Do
Did
you still
jazz band
play?
and or orchestra in high school. And yeah, I'm a big like music buff, I guess.
Do you still play now?
Not really, unfortunately.
Okay. Oh wow, that's fascinating. All right. I wrote a paper about Joe Arroyo in undergrad.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, that's fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, it's La Rebellion is a classic, of course. Um, but you do you prefer, and I'm sure you do, you prefer Colombian salsa to Puerto Rican salsa?
I enjoy both.
You do.
Honestly, yeah, it doesn't really matter to me where it's from. There's a yeah, like Oscar de Leon is Venezuelan. I love him. I've seen him live actually, and he's great. And it's funny because Puerto Rican salsa is really New Yorican. So
That's
yeah,
what I was
Willie
gonna say.
Colon,
Yeah.
yeah, New
Gran
Yorican.
combo. Yeah.
Rubén Blades is Panamanian, but yeah, he was part of the New
Oh,
Yorican scene. And then Cuba as well. Celia Cruz is amazing. Um,
yeah, of course. Of course. Speaking of a certain country, what is the real birthplace of reggaeton?
hmm.
Good question.
I'm I mean, technically, it's called reggaeton because there is an influence from reggae.
Yes. So it is born in Jamaica, but then which Latin American country was it that really born in then?
Hmm. It's not Puerto Rico.
No, it's not.
Hmm. I don't know.
You
Dominican
just
Republic?
no, it's just Panama.
Really? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because Jamaicans went to Panama to work and they played their reggae, and then the Panamanians did reggae en español, and then the Panamanians went to New York, met the Puerto Ricans, made it down to Puerto Rico. So yeah, reggaeton history is really fascinating. But
Look at that. Look at
uh,
that. Another thing I'll mention, there's a number of in Brazil, and actually I think I had a conversation with Bruna about this and she was like, "Oh no, no, that's not MPB." But in Brazil there's a term you use MPB, Música Popular Brasileira, popular Brazilian music,
mhm.
kind of a catch-all term. But there's these two artists in particular I like a lot, which actually she said that she doesn't.
Uh-oh.
But she's more prim and proper. They're rappers. There's like a strand of like Brazilian hip hop, but it's really interesting because it incorporates a lot of like fusion with like Brazilian rhythms, and
Really?
instruments and stuff like that. Uh, the artists are one's called Emicida and
Mm,
the other Criollo. And so it's interesting because they both rap and sing.
mm,
And then they're also both very, socially conscious and left wing, whatever. But the music is really, really great to me at least. And a lot of these like origins of different things. They, for instance, their families are both from the northeast of Brazil and migrated to Sao Paulo, and that's like a big historical phenomenon.
mm,
Um, that you can see, for instance, Lula, as Bruno mentioned in our article, was born in Pernambuco, the northeast, poor rural town. But as a child, his family moved to Sao Paulo, and he then became, a union leader, etc. And this dynamic is actually a term in Portuguese for it, and people of that persuasion that's really colored a lot of Brazil's recent history.
mm. Yeah, Brazil, I mean, like I said, the music, I think there's just such a depth and so much variety.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan for sure. Okay, we covered a lot of ground. So people who want to follow your stuff, what should we plug? We already said you're a columnist for Compact. They can read your work there. Your Twitter, we'll post the handle. What
Yeah,
else?
yeah. At Rojas R1D. Yeah, and yeah, I post all my work on there.
Awesome. Well, Juan, thank you very much for coming out.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen.